welcome everybody. This is Fiber World sponsoring me, Marianne Mohanraj, who I think I've probably met many of you, if not all of you, already, in a how to make Sri Lankan curry powder demo. So if you don't have your video on, that's fine. If you want to turn it on, that's also great. Either way is okay with me. Please feel free to ask questions at any point. Yeah, I think that's the basic intro stuff. And in terms of what we're going to be doing today, normally you would roast the spices, which we're not going to do because that's pretty slow and time consuming. So we're going to just talk through that step, and then we will actually do some grinding. And at the end of that, you'll have curry powder. It's pretty straightforward. I do this demo pretty often at like school fairs and things like that. And it's super fun for like the little kids to come and like scoop up all the spices and then grind them up. And you know, they can make their own curry powder right at the table in the gym. So I think a lot of people get sort of intimidated by the idea, and then they see how easy it is. It's like, oh, well, this is very easy. So any questions yet?
I guess nope. This is the first time I have seen curry leaves because I have never made curry before, and so I don't know anything about it because I've never made it, so I'm really curious.
I know it comes in a jar, right? That's the way I've always done it before.
Oh, we're showing our cooking skills here.
Well, I'll talk you through the whole sequence, I think. So good to know those questions are coming. So a little background information. If you look up curry powder, you may well find Indian people ranting about how there's no such thing as curry powder. I find that a little frustrating because in fact there is. The thing is there are many curry powders, right? Just like there's many tomato sauces and many, like there's just many, many, many versions of this. And like every one of my aunties will make her curry powder a little bit different. You make it to suit your own tastes. So what is true is there's a kind of curry powder that was popularized by the British that tends to be somewhat North Indian in approach, that has a ton of turmeric in it. It's yellow. And that got used really widely all over Europe, etc., as Indian curry powder. And that's usually what people are a little frustrated about when they encounter it, because it's nothing like, if I tried to use that, I wouldn't get anything that tasted like my food at all. Interestingly, I think that same curry powder made its way to Japan and was then modified to Japanese taste. And so they have a yellow curry sauce that is, I think, a pretty strong part of Japanese cuisine at this point. But again, it's really far from anything that would be a Sri Lankan curry. So that's the first thing, knowing where you are and knowing that if you've had things in restaurants in the West, there's a good chance they're really different from what they would be like at home. So for example, tikka masala is a delicious sauce. I love it. My kids love it. I find it comforting, but it is not an Indian sauce. It's like something that the British that was invented, colonized, and then, adopted by the British. And, it's rich and buttery and delicious and very much not like Indian home cooking, right? I would say. So, and in general, that's true of restaurant cuisine. Often it's much richer than home cooking because the restaurant wants you to be happy. So they're going to put in a lot of butter or a lot of oil, and that's going to make it really tasty. But if you ate that way every day, you'd feel sick, right? So at home, people don't tend to cook that way. So that's just kind of like a sort of general overview. If you're interested in this, there was a great episode I was listening to with Samin Nasrat on her home cooking podcast where she was talking to a guest about korma, I think it was, and like just the massive difference between what the West thinks of as korma, and which has a lot of cream in it, and most South Asians are actually lactose intolerant to some extent. And so cream is not a part of the cuisine. Milk is usually not used in cooking. And so cheeses, dairy, that whole genre is not so much there. And so if you were making, I think, a traditional korma, which is a North Indian thing and not something I make, it's like roasted ground almonds, if I'm remembering right, is like the actual base of the sauce. So it's nuts instead of cream, right? It's a completely different ingredient. So that's the kind of like almost shocking difference you'll find between home cooking and what has made it, the adaptations that have made it to the West. Okay, so to make curry powder, we do it because it's convenient, right? If you were going to, every time you wanted to cook, you were going to like stand there and grind all your spices fresh. They would be fresh and that's tasty, but it's time consuming, right? So make a batch maybe once a week, maybe once a month, depending on how often you use them up. And then you have it around and you can save some steps on a busy weeknight when you're tired, right? As well, there's two main types of curry powder, I would say. There's actually other variations, but the main difference is whether you roast or don't roast it and how much you roast it, I guess. So today, what I was going to do, since I'm not roasting them in advance, is I'm just going to make it the unroasted way. Most of the time, I cook with roasted curry powder. It's like roasting coffee beans. It brings out the flavor and it changes the flavor, and it's the way I prefer it. Last note is that if you buy, so the kind of curry powder I'm making is very similar to what you might see as listed as Jaffna curry powder. Jaffna is a city in the north of Sri Lanka, and it is populated by the Tamil ethnic group, which is also what I am. So it's a certain, approach that is different from what you might find in the South. It will typically have chili powder mixed in. And when I say chili powder, I mean cayenne. So we call it chili powder casually. Like if you go anywhere in Sri Lanka or India, they'll say chili powder. What they mean is crushed dried cayenne. So it's not Tex-Mexy chili powder, which has other stuff mixed into it, right? So that can be super confusing for people. If you go to like the Indian neighborhood, they'll, here in Chicago, we have Devon, you'll get like big bags of red chili powder, and they'll often be labeled as like hot, extra hot, telling you how hot the chilies were that they used when they made that, when they ground it up, right? And it's just red chilies dried and then ground. So you can kind of like, buy and adjust to your taste, essentially. If you buy Jaffna curry powder, like you can go on Amazon and just buy it. It has cayenne mixed in. So super convenient for those of us who grew up with it and like know that, okay, if I put this in, it's going to already like bump me up to this heat level, which is great. That's a good base level. And then if I'm feeling like something fiery, I'll add a little more cayenne, right? And take it up, here or maybe here. I mean, if I were making a chicken curry for myself, I probably would use maybe 1 teaspoon of the curry powder, which has a little cayenne mixed in, and then 1 to 2 tablespoons of cayenne on top of that. But that's, that's for a spice head, right? Like that's for people who really like it hot. And I think one of the misconceptions about South Asian food in general is that people think it has to be hot, and it just doesn't. Like you can leave out all of the heat and it's still completely authentic. One of my sisters does not love spicy food. She doesn't tend to make her stuff spicy. There are lots of people who don't, and they just don't put cayenne into their curry mix, right? So it's you can kind of adjust it up or down as you want. If you're allergic to capsaicin, which some people are, you can also just skip all the chili stuff and use black pepper instead, right? So some people do that. I'm trying to think what other adaptations there are. If you don't do ginger or garlic. Sorry, one sec. Hey, Anand, I'm recording. You need to be quiet. So that was my son. Hopefully he heard that. If you use, if you can't do ginger and garlic, which are really pretty common spices in or seasonings in our cooking, you might try asafoetida, which is an unusual spice, also known as hing. And it can give you a little bit of that same flavor. So I occasionally run across people who have like an allium allergy, and so this is a possible workaround. In India, the Jain religion, people who follow that don't eat any strong allium, so they don't do ginger, garlic, onions, and so asafoetida is one of their key spices. All right, that was a whole bunch of background stuff. I was gonna start going through what the spices are in front of me that we're gonna use today, but do you have any questions before I dive into that?
Someone asked about, are there substitutions for somebody who's sensitive to cardamom?
I would leave it out. I just skip it. So in fact, like all of these spices, I would say, I'd say none of them are essential. You mix and match as you want. So this is my blend that I like the combination of them. And yeah, I don't know of anything that will reproduce the cardamom flavor. So I would just skip it. And that's true of a lot of these. Like there isn't really a good substitute for cloves or curry leaves or cinnamon. So if you can't do that or you just don't like the flavor, leave it out. It'll still be delicious. If you leave out all but one, then I'm not sure you have a curry powder. But but aside from that, okay. Any other questions before I dive in? No? Okay.
Nope,
Let me see if I can take this back a little bit so we can get the spices in. No, that doesn't work. Okay, well, I'll just show you. So over here, we have various spices in these lovely square glass jars. So, all right. And I will lift them up. I like these glass jars, by the way, the square ones, because they're stackable. So they're very efficient for pantry storage, or for me, I actually have them on the kitchen shelves because I use them so often that it's just easier to pull them down. They are kind of like big and solid and heavy, so you have to be willing to like pick those up and put them down again a lot. All right, so the biggest spice we use is coriander. And I'm guessing most people are familiar with coriander seed. And this is the same plant as cilantro, right? So the leafy greens that are used so much in Mexican cuisine and also in South Asian cuisine are the green leafy bits, and the dried seed pods are the coriander. So same exact thing. So for this one doesn't fit in there. I will pour. Let's say I'm going to do a half cup of this. I don't actually remember what the proportions are that I have on my website, but this is a kind of rough idea. So I'm going to put in a half cup. That's kind of like the base of your curry powder, okay? And now what I would normally do is I wouldn't start grinding right away or mixing. I would roast them in a dry pan on the stove on low heat, stirring. So it's a little time consuming and tedious. You may be tempted to turn up the heat. If you do, there's a good likelihood they'll burn. You may be tempted to wander away. If you do, there's a good likelihood they'll burn. If you have a 12-year-old, I find this is an excellent task to set them to. And they can watch TV on a device while they're standing there and stirring, right? So I'll just put that out there as an option. Unfortunately, once they turn 13, they may get a little cranky about it, and then it's harder to persuade them. That has been also my experience. At 12, she was great about it. So, and now she's like, I have this conversation with my friends. I'm like, all right. So the other thing to be careful of we're going to be roasting 4 of the spices, 4 of these seeds. So coriander seed, cumin seed, fennel seed, and fenugreek seed, also called methy seed. And you can't do them together. You want to do them together because that would be more efficient, but they cook at different speeds. And if you try them to do them together, some of them will burn by the time others have toasted, right? So that is also unfortunate. I'm told that it is possible to do it in a slow roasting pan in the oven. So I haven't tried that yet. So if you want to try that, I would go
Edge I
research.
was going to give you was bad. So
Oh, no.
we just have a little bit of, I'm sorry.
Sorry, is that a question or?
No, I was
No,
talking.
I'm sorry, I was unmuted, my bad.
Hi, Becca. So yeah, so it may work for you. It's a little risky. I haven't had the nerve to try it yet. But I probably will at some point because it is a little time consuming doing it this way. All right, I say so a lot. After coriander seed, cumin seed. You're all probably pretty familiar with cumin seed. Cumin, I would say, is one of the ones that's very hard to get away from in South Asian cuisine. It's a really standard base spice. So I'm going to put in about a 1/4 cup of that. And I'm not roasting any of these. I'm going to make an unroasted version. You don't have to roast it. It'll still be tasty. It'll just be a little different, right? But normally I would stand over the stove and be stirring and stirring and stirring. And I'm usually, when I'm roasting, I'm mostly looking for a color change. It'll start, and a scent. It'll start to smell roasted. The scent will change a lot. It gets very aromatic. And when I say that, I mean, you probably want your vent fan on and if possible, the doors open. Because otherwise, especially if you live in a smaller place, like when I was doing this in my grad school apartment, the whole apartment would smell like curry powder for like 2-3 days in the winter. So if you're okay with that, great, right? If you don't want your place to smell like curry powder, then take some precautions. My mom would actually always do this outside. Even though we lived in Connecticut, we had a covered porch when we moved into a house when I was 12 or 13, I think. And she would go out and had a little I don't know, an electric pan kind of thing that she could plug in. And she would do it out on the covered porch so that it wouldn't make the whole house or even the kitchen smell like curry powder. And of course, in Sri Lanka, a lot of this would have been done outside, right? Over a fire, traditionally. So you don't have to worry about it because you're outside. But as people have moved more indoors and are in apartments and so on, they've had to adapt. I would say coriander doesn't take too long to turn. It takes, a little while. Cumin for me takes the longest. And usually I do it until it takes a little while. It starts popping. And that's how you know that it's gotten quite dry. And you don't have to wait that long. Depends on how impatient I am. But you can, certainly. Okay, then after that, sorry, that's loud. We have fennel. Fennel seeds look like cumin seeds. They're a little bit bigger and they're pale green. And I love the smell of it. They smell like licorice and they taste like licorice. So if you like licorice, fennel is for you. If you don't like licorice, you may want to skip it. So I like it. And again, I'm just kind of I'm gonna say, I want about a teaspoon of it in here, right? So I think some people, when they start cooking, they like to follow a recipe very exactly, and other people, they start messing with it from the moment they see the recipe, and just totally up to you. I usually will follow a recipe close to exactly the first time through, so I know what the cook, the chef thinks it should taste like. But then the second time through, I start changing things, right? So fennel toasts pretty fast. So you put it in, you stir, and within 30 seconds, it's changed from color to a light brown color, and it's ready to come out. And similarly, methy seeds, fenugreek, which I'm only going to put in maybe a 1/4 teaspoon. Also change color really fast. They'll go from light brown to kind of like an orangey golden brown. Okay, and so at that point, oh, and you may not know about methy seeds. So methy seeds are cool because fenugreek, right? I usually call them fenugreek. I think in Sri Lanka, we mostly call it fenugreek. In India, northern India, I think it's known as methy seeds. So depending on when you go to the Indian grocery store, it might be listed under either name. It's a great flavor. I like the flavor, but they are also a galactagogue. So which means that they are very effective in increasing milk production in breastfeeding mothers. So that's what galactagogue means. And so your doctor might prescribe you some fenugreek pills or a drink, right, that you can go and get if you're having trouble with milk production at your local Walgreens. You can go and pick that up. But in Sri Lanka, we would make curries that are very heavy in fenugreek for new moms, and it's usually a coconut milk curry. Usually my mom tried to convince me to skip the cayenne and like keep it all very mild when my babies were little, and I didn't, because what is life without some heat? But anyway, but traditionally you'd make a very neutral, very simple, creamy color curry, coconut cream curry that is loaded with fenugreek, and there's a sort of kind of amazing amounts of fenugreek, and it has a very distinct flavor then, but it's very effective at increasing milk production. So, and there's a phrase like milk to bring the milk, which is like you're drinking this, you're eating this coconut milky curry that is going to help bring on milk production. So anyway, if you have a friend who's a new mom, you can make her a nice curry loaded with fenugreek. Don't put in chili unless she likes chili. And it would be a nice thing to I usually do, like when I have friends who are having babies, I often end up cooking some stuff for them and dropping it off, and I usually put in a curry like that. So it's also, leaving all of that aside, it gets used a lot in seafood dishes. So it pairs really well with fish and seafood, aside from the curry powder. Like you'll often sort of saute, as you're sauteing onions with other spices to build the base of your curry, you'll often put some fenugreek in there as well, if you're making fish. Okay, almost done. So those were the 4 that we roast. And then there's 3 that we just grind in. So cloves, you're all familiar with cloves, I assume. So I'm putting 3 cloves in. Cardamom. So these are cardamom pods, and what I can do here is take my little mortar and pestle and break them, because I don't actually want the husks in this, because it's all going to get ground up into a fine paste, not a paste, like a powder, and the husks are not tasty. So what you want are just the seeds, and so I'm just pulling the husks out. If you are going to be making a lot of this at the Indian store, you can buy bags of just cardamom seeds. So that's what I typically would use for this, is I have my nice big bag of cardamom seeds. You don't need very much at any given point. So I would just put in my little 1/4 teaspoon or whatever of that. And then cinnamon, there's kind of 2 options here. So, okay. Actually, I have to back up and talk about cinnamon. So there are different kinds of cinnamon. There is, I always get these a little confused, so I'm hoping I get it right this time. There is hard cinnamon stick, which is probably what most Americans are familiar with from baking, right? That's usually what we get around here. There is true cinnamon, which is in true Ceylon cinnamon, which comes from Sri Lanka, which I believe is the soft one that I think is also known as cassia cinnamon, although I'm not positive of that, but I think that's right. it looks very different. And I'm sorry, I don't have any on hand right now because I've used it all up. So all I have, I think, is the hard stick cinnamon. But if you Google, you can certainly see plenty of examples. And the soft true Ceylon cinnamon, well, it has a better flavor. So I will just say, like, it's better. It, may cost a little more. So you have to kind of judgment call for yourself whether you want to do that. It may not. It depends on where you are. And often, like, you can find it in the Mexican area of the grocery store as well. So you might look for it there. It's much more papery, so it's easy to crush. It's easy to break off, as opposed to the hard stick cinnamon, which is a lot of work to break up. So I can do it, but if I want to take this and I want to break it into lots of small pieces that will be easy for my spice grinder to handle, it's going to be some work. And when I'm making big batches of curry powder, and if this is all I have on hand, what I do is I put them in a big Ziploc bag, put a dish towel over it, and then often we'll get a child to come and hammer it with the, what is this called? With the rolling pin, right? So you go, right? And you can get some good force on that. And that will pretty effectively break up your cinnamon. You'll have a lot of little cinnamon sticks. You can, again, use the mortar and pestle and kind of like do that. Break it up pretty well to small pieces that probably your spice grinder can handle if you're using an electric spice grinder. If you're planning to do all of this by hand, which I will tell you I never do, you need strong hands. I guess it's strong arms at any rate. In Sri Lanka, so they would have, like my grandmother's house would have a mortar like that has this shape, like a stone mortar, but it would be huge. It would be like this big around, right? And it sits on the floor. It's about, I want to say knee high, maybe a little taller. So this huge stone thing. And then the pestle is similarly large. Instead of something like this, it is, I want to say, like this long, right? So, sorry, being here that long. So we're holding the thing. And you would think that would be hard to manage something that heavy because it is heavy. But if you watch someone who knows what they're doing, they use momentum. So what happens, and I'm sure you can go on YouTube and see videos of this. So they'll put the spices in or whatever they're going to grind, like maybe they're making a paste, so there might be some liquid added at some point. And they take the pestle and they slam it down, and then it bounces up again, right? And then they catch it and slam it down again, right? So they're getting some of the force of the bounce to help them keep doing it. Does that make sense? It's pretty cool to watch. I've never done it myself. When I saw someone doing it, I was probably too young to manage it, but I thought it was cool. So I don't think you can do that with this. Yeah, it doesn't really bounce in the same way. They would kind of like slam it down hard and it would go back up again. So, all right. So I have some curry, some cinnamon stick. I have the rest of my spices in here. Any questions? I feel like I've been talking for a really long time at this point. So is it anything that I rushed over or was unclear as I was going? No? All right, you all?
No, it all sounds good.
Okay.
Actually, long-time fan, first-time viewer.
Welcome. So
I was curious, Marianne, how long do you brown it for when you're cooking it? I kind of joined midway, and I think I missed that.
Well, it's hard to say. I would say, you want to see it change color, and it'll start smelling roasted. It'll smell very different. I guess I would say the reason it's hard to say is I get impatient fairly often, right? And if you're impatient, then what happens is, and also I have ADD, and so I get distracted and I go off to do other things and come back. And so what happens is they roast unevenly, right? And I can live with that, with some of mine being more roasted than others, right? Because then I end up with a mix of like roasted and unroasted curry powder, and that's also fine, right? So, but it means that if you're aiming for even color, you really have to stand there and stir the whole time, which also means that it takes longer because they're not like sitting and collecting heat as much. The fact that you're moving them around is also cooling them a little bit. So it can be a very slow process. I would suspect to do it right is probably at least 30 minutes, maybe 45. So yeah, again, find your 12-year-old and set them up with a nice show in front of it.
I don't think a show would help me.
My son's over here saying, well, Cubby used to do it. You're not 12 yet. How old are you?
11.
Yeah, you're 11. And
Yeah,
when
I
you're
don't
12,
think a year would help me very much.
it'll be magic. You'll see. So, not sure my son is convinced, but at this point, it's very simple though. Like I use a coffee grinder that I keep dedicated for spices. So you don't have to do that. You can use your regular coffee grinder or a mortar and pestle if you want. But it's hard to clean out all the spices from your coffee. So I would say if you're going to be grinding anything other than like, I don't know, cinnamon or cloves, any of these other spices, I think probably don't go so well with coffee. So so that's my recommendation. I think a basic, you don't need anything fancy. I want to say a basic coffee grinder, you can find an electric grinder, you can find for like $20, $25 maybe. This one is a little bit more, I think it was maybe 40. What I like about it is this is the Chefman grinder. It claims to have many different grind finenesses, which I have not found that to be noticeably true. But what it does do is that you hit the button and it just grinds until everything in the hopper has gone through. Lots of coffee grinders, you have to stand there holding it as it grinds, which again, this isn't a big deal if you're only doing a little bit, but I often am doing, you know, really big batches that are, I usually when I grind like 10 batches at once. So that's actually also probably going to affect how long it takes to roast things. Because I have a really wide pan and I have a lot of spices in there that I'm stirring around. So anyway, so you hit the button, it grinds until it's done. And then there's a separate little thing that comes out with a lid, and then you're done. That's basically it. So I'm going to hit the button. It's going to get very loud, so brace yourselves. And then you can hear when it's basically gotten through its stuff. You can also usually hear if sometimes like a piece of cinnamon stick will get stuck in there and then it'll start making a nasty sound and you know to stop it and dig out that piece of cinnamon stick. But basically you're done at that point. You have a fresh batch of curry powder. And I'm going to talk about curry leaves in a minute. I know someone's going to be like, but where are the curry leaves? So we'll talk about that in one sec. But this is a good basic batch of curry powder. If it's not a fine enough grind to make you happy, you can run it through again, right? So like some grinders do it more finely ground than others. I don't feel like it makes that much difference once you're putting it in a curry. If it's, you know, like it's all going to kind of disappear into the sauce. So it doesn't really matter that it's not finely ground. Curry leaves. So I didn't put any curry leaves in here. The main reason is because I don't have any on hand right now. I was making a squash curry yesterday and I used up the last of my batch. So I have to go to Whole Foods or Pete's locally and pick up some more. It's kind of amazing to me that I can do that now because 2 years ago I couldn't. At that point, I could order dried curry leaves online, or I could drive an hour away to the Indian grocery store and get fresh curry leaves. so it's only very recently that it's come enough into the cuisine that I live in a major metropolitan area with a lot of foodie people. And so now I can go to my local grocery stores and they will have fresh curry leaves just like they have fresh cilantro, which is awesome. I also had a curry leaf tree that I grew in my house, like a tropical plant, but it succumbed to a blight. After several years of doing very well, it succumbed to a blight last year and I haven't replaced it yet. So usually, like I would just, for many years, I would just go over and pick leaves off the tree and use those. So you can actually buy fresh curry leaves on Amazon now, which I find amazing. I tried it just to check, and the ones that came were great. They were, very fresh, had clearly just been picked, and they were sent quickly, and they were ready to use when they got here. If you get a big batch and it's more than you can use right away, they freeze pretty decently. So that's what I would do. I would say, like, if I'm not going to use them within a week, I would probably freeze them and pull them out as needed. Dried leaves have less flavor than fresh. So I would say if you're using dry, you probably want to use more than the fresh leaves, right?
So when I did the spice kits this time, I actually, because I know these things, included a little bit, because we used the dried, I included a bit more of the curry than was called for in your recipe
Nice.
to make up for that. But I had a question about that because I'm used to using the fresh as well, but because I didn't know about shipping it around, I wanted to use the dried this time. But it came with a lot of sticks, for want of a better word. And I think it's the sort of the middle part of the leaf after they've dried, that's the more leafy
So
part has
there's the
broken
stalk,
away.
right? So it
Yeah,
has a stalk.
that's what I'm talking about.
And then leaves. So I would say that you should, when I cook, I will often just put the entire stalk in there. I don't even bother taking the leaves off the stalk if I have a
Okay.
stalk on hand, because there's still more flavor in the stalk, right? So
Yeah,
it's the
like the
same flavor. It's
cilantro.
not going to change the flavor. And you generally don't eat either the leaves or the stalk, right? So I mean, it won't hurt you
Right.
to eat some leaves as you're going, but typically if you like go to Sri Lanka and you see someone eating, we're eating with our hands, which makes it very easy to kind of like, as you're eating, you'll pick out leaves, you'll pick out cardamom pods. Nobody likes biting into cardamom pods, right? So like you kind of pick those out as you go. If there's a big cinnamon stick, you pick it out. And so you'll end up with your plate like just a little pile of discards on the edge, right? Of leaves and pods and so on. So yeah, I mean, so I would say it may be, depending on where you got it from. Like I'm trying to remember. I don't think I've seen a lot of stalks in the dried leaves that I used to buy, but it's been, I don't know, it's been like a decade or more since I bought dried leaves, so I don't really remember very well. I made curry powder.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure whether they could
Yeah.
be used or not. And
Yeah, they
I
absolutely can.
assumed that if they were in there, it was fine, but I just, in case, thought I'd ask.
Yeah, no, I think it's fine. It may be that like there may be a little bit of like, if you buy higher quality stuff, maybe they pick those out, but I don't think it matters. Yeah. A lot of that stuff is almost more for appearance than anything else. Like, like the little local market near me has beautiful cloves. You go to their spice section and all their cloves are like large and gorgeous and they look really pretty. And I don't think it matters at all for cooking, right? That whether the cloves are sort of broken or not broken or whatever else. It's great for like if you're studying a cloved orange at the holidays, sure, like it's nice to have really pretty cloves, but if you're throwing it in a curry, who cares?
Yeah.
So, okay. I think that's most of it. So I didn't put curry leaves in here also because they're hard for people to get still for the most part. And you really don't need them in your curry powder. I didn't have access to them for a long time. I cooked without them. It still is Sri Lankan. when I could get them, they were still kind of rare, and I didn't usually bother. You toast them in on the stovetop again, so they dry before you try and crumble and mix them into the curry powder. And if you live somewhere where there are like massive bushes of them in your garden, sure, you could do that. But here, where they're a little bit of a treasure, I would, my little curry leaf tree would have like 24 healthy leaves on it, and I would just save those to use fresh. And put them in a curry. It's a very distinct flavor, and there is no substitution. So I will occasionally run across someone saying like, I've seen recipes from the UK that are like, if you don't have curry leaves, try a bay leaf and some lime juice. I'm like, it's not even close to the same flavor. I don't know what they're thinking. So again, just leave it out if you don't have it, and that's fine, right? So it'll still be delicious. So I think that's it. That is how you make curry powder. And my plan for our next session was that you'd all come back with curry powder and we would try to do a cook along, actually making something.
Marianne, we had a couple of questions in
Sure.
chat.
Yeah.
One of them was if you could get away with using a food processor, and how hard is it to start a curry plant and or tree at home?
Okay, so I've never tried using a food processor to grind spices. I'm not sure. I think you can experiment and see. I would say if you have one of those mini chops, like maybe it would work in there. I just feel like in a big food processor, I'm not sure, like the blade is too big, the spices are too small. I don't know that it would actually grind finely. I could be wrong.
I'm sorry, I'm going to step in because
if someone else knows,
you
I've never
can
tried.
actually get a pretty fine grind on a regular sized food processor if everything is dry enough, because it relies on the force of the items going around and getting lifted, because the blade is not close enough to the ground or to the bottom to really get a good grind. And it's not, the blades aren't twisted in the way that they are on a small like coffee grinder to get that kind of a grind. But it takes longer, but you can do it. But you do get a better, more similar to a coffee grind on a small food processor. Mini chop is a little different, but what we have, excuse me, that I would use to do this is a hand blender with a mini chopper attachment to it. And that has a very similar kind of construction to a coffee grinder. For what it's
That all
worth.
makes sense to me. Thank you. And then there was another question. I'm sorry, I've now forgotten.
I think
How hard is it to start a plant? The curry plant.
Start a curry plant.
So I would say, I've tried to start it from seed a couple times and have not succeeded in that. And I can grow other things from seed. So I think that's a little bit tricky. There are people selling them online on Etsy. I think Logie's is a good reputable source, Logee, for any tropical plants. So they have a website and a catalog and so on. So you can buy a small plant there and have it shipped to you. It'll be very small usually, and then it takes a long time for it to get big enough to be useful. So it's kind of a long-term investment if you get one of the little 4-inch plants. Here in Chicago, we have about an hour outside of Chicago, there's a place called Ted's Greenhouse in Tinley Park. Maybe a little more than an hour. And they specialize in tropicals and cactuses and so on. So that's where I bought mine. They actually came to the Oak Park Farmers Market and they had like this big, curry leaf shrubby things, right? And we're not charging an outrageous amount. I want to say maybe $40 for something of that size is great. So I would, you could call around to local nurseries is probably what I would say, and say, do you carry tropicals? Do you have, a curry leaf plant? And if not, if they don't carry it regularly, they may still be willing to get one for you if you ask, right? So that's definitely an option. One thing to be careful of, and I wanted to mention this, is curry tree leaf is, the Latin name is Mariah conegi. Be sure that's what you're getting, because there's another plant called curry plant that has a different Latin name. I don't remember it off the top of my head. It is not edible. It looks very different. It has sort of like rosemary shaped leaves, like those kind of like sticks coming out, but they're fuzzy and silvery green. And so it smells like curry, which is why it's called curry plant, but it's not edible and it's not for cooking. So yeah, I mean, it's lovely. I've had it, I've grown it, but don't try to cook with it. So yeah. Any other questions?
If you're going to be,
Sorry, go on.
if you're going to be picking the leaves out, so you don't grind up the leaves, you just leave them whole when you put them in?
So if I were adding it into my curry powder mix, then I would toast it on the stovetop. They quickly get like dry and crispy, and then I'd crumble it into a fine powder and so on. If I'm cooking them fresh in the curry, if I'm cooking them fresh in the curry, I would, then I just put it in the stock fresh. And again, I don't go to a lot of effort to pull them out. Like I'm sure I've eaten quite a lot of curry leaves in my time. They don't really taste like anything. So it's like, in terms of like biting into one, it's like biting into paper or something. All the flavor goes into the sauce, right? So it's sort of like bay leaves don't taste like anything, right? Like they're, they do something because Samin Nosrat tells you that it does, but you're not sure what exactly. Sorry, it's one of those things that like, sometimes people get very debatey about like, do the bay leaves actually do anything? They do, and especially if you can get fresh bay leaves, they do. So, any other questions, thoughts? I have a question for you, which is, are you people coming back on Friday? And if so, would you rather we made a beef curry or a chicken curry or a vegetarian curry? You can use this curry powder in any of them, so whatever people feel like is fine with me. And yes, it's the same time on Friday. And I would say for vegetarian, probably the options would be eggplant, mushrooms, chickpeas. All of those would work well. Squash, I would say, except I just made a squash curry, so I don't really want to make one again on Friday. I still have squash curry in my fridge, but it works in squash. So.
I vote chicken, but I don't know.
We have one vote for chicken. I don't know. In fact, Cal could take a poll, maybe, or somebody there. If you guys want to take a poll and just let me know by tomorrow, so I can buy my ingredients, that would be great. So your options are beef, pork, chicken, fish. You may want to narrow this down, but any of those would be fine. And then of the vegetable things, eggplant, mushrooms, or chickpeas. So. I think all of those go well with the curry powder. For lentils, we cook a lot of lentils, but I wouldn't use this curry powder I wouldn't use curry powder for lentils usually. So it is good with anything. Other things you can do with this, if you do eat meat, it makes a great grill rub. So you just take the curry powder, you mix it with a little oil and some salt and rub it over a steak or some chicken and throw it on the grill. We do that all summer. We use this in if you like Insta cooking in an Instapot, like there's a pot roasty kind of recipe that I usually, because I work at home most of the time, I have not been using my Instapot very much, especially during the pandemic. But if you're someone who's going out to a 9-to-5, that can be a good option as well. You end up with a sort of pot roasty thing waiting for you when you get home at the end of the day that's full of spices. So it's called beef s'more in the cookbook. And it's sort of like, it's an Indonesian inflected dish. So it's tasty. I think that's all I got. Anyone there or any of the Fiber World people have, it looks like someone else is posting another question. I can't quite read it though.
preferred Indian store in East Bay?
Sorry, say that again.
You have a preferred Indian. Oh, I'm sorry. You have a preferred Indian store in East Bay.
East Bay of California?
Oh yeah, I'm still living in the same area, Marianne. So I was just curious if any of the particular Indian stores like on University or around the area.
Oh, it's been so long. I don't remember. You know, like it's been,
Yeah.
God, how long? 20 years or something like that since I lived
Good
there.
Lord, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry.
I
don't-
figured there's no way in the world I'm getting a shipment of spices by Friday.
Yeah. Well, honestly, Amazon sometimes does ship that fast, but yes, if you have a local Indian store, that's probably a better bet.
Oh yeah, Berkeley is still got quite a number.
Yeah, I would say if you are looking for high quality spices and you feel like mail ordering and spending a little more money, Penzies is my go-to. They're really good. They're like, they have a Telecherry black peppercorn that is the only black pepper I'm willing to use at this point. Their cinnamon is really good. That's why I'm like, I'm out of cinnamon and I have to order some more from Penzies. Their vanilla is amazing. Both their vanilla beans, and they have like a double strength vanilla extract. That's really good. So, I mean, all the spices I get from them have been great. So there's certain things that I'm like, yeah, you know, the grocery store version is fine. But then you're like, but if I buy the really good vanilla bean, everyone is like, you just made sugar cookies. Why do they taste so good? Right? And I'm like, it's the Penzies vanilla beans. That's why. So, yeah. So, I think that's it. I got nothing else. If you guys don't have anything else. I don't know what, were you planning on doing like Stitch and Bitchy stuff, or were we just all wandering off at this point? So
Kind of up to what people want to do. I'm toasting, so
So you're going to be there a while.
I'm not going anywhere but in chair because I'm definitely another in the ADD club squirrel. So, and my 12-year-old is upstairs, so she did come.
yeah. That's a problem when they retreat to the upstairs, right? So
yeah, I think
much harder to set them to tasks at that point. So
I'm
the kids have
long
learned that
past
lesson
getting them to
well.
do anything.
Yeah.
To be fair, they have already done everything that I asked them to do, so
yes. I mean, I feel like the food is downstairs, so that means that at least 3 times a day I have a chance to snag them for chores. So, you know, it usually works reasonably well. They're pretty wary of like, like keeping an eye out for where mom is at any given moment. But
That's how you know you're doing a good job.
yeah. So are you all fiber artisty people, or are you? I don't know.
yes. Some of us.
Some of us, and then
For myself, yes.
Yeah.
I have no idea
I
who
joke.
these people are.
I
Put a flyer on the ground. I picked it up, and here I am.
I'm Becca's minion.
Oh yes, yes.
want to know
Fight
what.
we managed to get all the flyers out.
Nice.
You didn't
I
hear
want to
about
know
our
when you
strategy?
retreated to a log cabin.
Yeah, I was like, where are you?
It was left over from my LARP, where everybody showed up in costume, and I was like, oh shit, I don't have a costume. So I happened to be wearing a flannel shirt. So my character turned into a person who lived in a log cabin in New England and had an axe and hunted monsters.
This is not so far from your actual life.
I know, right?
Yeah.
You feel that, right? Yeah. So it was fun, and they said they had killed the players said that they had killed a Wendigo in the last episode of the LARP, and then I berated them for not killing it right, and it really was me. I think I was channeling my inner professor at that point. I'm like, what'd you do that for? It was fun.
Oh my God.
Real good Fs.
Art imitates life.
When I come back on Friday, I will try and remember to borrow my husband's iPad so that we don't have the fuzziness. So I hope that wasn't too irritating. I was like, I could have taken it off, but the screen protector I use is called Paperlike, I think is the name of it. and it adds texture to my screen for drawing, and it's really, I love
nice.
it. And I was a little afraid if I took it off, I wouldn't be able to get it back on again.
Yeah.
That's fair.
We could hear
Probably
you.
better to leave it in place then, yeah.
Being able to hear you was kind of the most important part. So I think
Yeah. And you
Excellent.
just look
Well,
like you're
I'm
in
glad you
soft
can hear me. If
focus. Like,
that worked fine, right? Because I also have a headset and a mic and all this fancy stuff that we could implement if needed. But you all could hear me okay?
no, you're
Oh,
great.
yeah, it's fine.
Okay. Excellent.
fabulous.
Excellent. So
I got 2 more to roast.
look at you go. So
Well, coriander took a minute. And what's funny is I actually have some coriander from my garden from this year.
Yeah.
Hmm.
When it all went to seed, I was like, wait,
Gonna say, did
Huh?
you harvest seed as well? That's fantastic.
I did. I had we used the leaves because my kids love guacamole, and so every time my husband is like, "Okay, I'm doing grocery shopping," because he does most of that, because he actually leaves the house. He's doing work, and he there. I was like, avocados, and then we have just a little bit of cilantro of dried. But when it all went to seed, I kept all the seeds and was like, well, I'll learn what to do with this eventually. And it's funny because I got the kit. And I actually posted up on my Instagram the spice kit. So it's all of these cute, teeny, but all of these cute bags. Like I can't see myself, so I'm just talking at the screen.
Yeah.
That's okay. I clearly can do that. So and my kitchen smells really, really good even before I started toasting anything. And I'm out of the room and walk back in, I'm gonna be like, because I'll be able to smell it again.
Yeah, and I should say your hair and your clothes will also pick up that scent. So if you have to go to work the next day and it's like plan to shower, all of that. All of that kind of stuff.
Office mates are skeins of yarn, so I will definitely shower before I go and hang out with them.
Yeah, exactly, right. So, yeah, my hair sometimes will just smell like curry powder for days on end. So,
well, I'm gonna mute myself and turn my fan back on.
I'm surprised none of the yarn I brought back to Becca and Kel's house after I did my holiday baking smelled like anise, because I did a massive batch of anise flavored cookies and the entire house smelled of it.
Yeah.
I one more spice thing I'll just tell you. For Friday, you'll need black mustard seed if you see it, or brown mustard seed. Usually that's easy to find. Yellow is not ideal. It tastes different. So you can use it in a pinch, but I would if you can find black or brown, that's better. The sort of first step in most Sri Lankan curries is chop onions, heat some oil with black mustard seeds. You're essentially kind of like making mustard oil. When it starts to pop, put in the onions, and then cumin seed. And that's kind of like the minimal, like if I were making a vegetable curry back in grad school where I didn't want to do very much else, then all you need after that is a little turmeric and salt and the vegetable in question, green beans or carrots or whatever. So the meat curries and some of the fancier vegetable curries use the curry powder and more of the other spices. But so yes, I can, once I know what the thing is that we're making on Friday, I can send back a recipe so people know what groceries they need to get.
Terrific. We will post that.
Okay. Well, I think that's it. I think that's all I've got for you guys right now. So I might let everybody go and hopefully see some of you, if not all of you, on Friday. So yay!